Does Yuji Itadori secretly have a memory modification technique with ties to blood manipulation? Let's talk about it. All right, y'all. So I'm sure most of you have heard this theory in some form or fashion over the years, but for anyone who's not familiar with it, the general idea here is that Yuji has some sort of ability to manipulate memories. And we see this happen twice with each of his brothers from the series, Todo and Choso. We first see this in reference to Todo, when he and Yuji first meet each other, and Todo is basically beating the brakes off of Yuji up until the moment memories that didn't exist started flooding his mind, and he had all of these memories of him and Yuji being best friends in school. And then we get this moment with Choso, where he too was beating the brakes off of Yuji up until the moment he started remembering things that never actually happened. And we see Choso recall this dinner at a picnic table with his brothers and Yuji. So this happening once is crazy, but it happening twice begs the question of, wait, what's going on here, right? Because it almost seems like a defense mechanism. Every time Yuji is getting beaten up, all of a sudden his enemies have these false memories that never occurred that make them view Yuji as a friend or even as a brother all of a sudden, right? So what is this? So I'm sure you can understand why this was a wildly popular fan theory back in the day, that Yuji might have some sort of memory manipulation technique that he didn't fully grasp yet. And the reason I say it was a popular fan theory is because it's been debunked at this point. And the first piece of information we got in relation to this was an explanation as to why this happened with Choso. And I'm going to try to keep this short here, but essentially we know that Choso is a curse womb death painting, and spoilers for anime onlys, we come to find out that he does share a parent in a way in Kinjaku with Yuji. So Yuji and Choso are in fact brothers, at least in a manner of speaking. And we know that Choso, because of his cursed womb death painting existence, and you could even say because of his blood manipulation technique, has this sixth sense where he can tell when his brothers are about to die. We saw this happen at the end of season 1 when Yuji and Nobara killed Ezo and Kechizu, I think that's their names. Choso knew that his brothers had been killed instantly. So then when he was fighting Yuji and Yuji was on the brink of death, his ability to sense his brothers dying kicked in, and this is the shape that it took. Now Choso didn't understand that that's what was happening in the moment because he didn't know about his connection to Yuji yet, but he later goes on to piece it together. So this memory we can make sense of, and Yuji had nothing to do with it. But even in addition to that, we know that Yuji didn't have any secret technique because of Gojo and the Six Eyes, because we know that the Six Eyes can perceive the flow of cursed energy within people's bodies, and Gojo can even tell what people's curse techniques are by looking at them with these things. And we know that at the beginning of the series, he basically tells Yuji, hey, sorcery is 80% talent, you got to be born with it, and you weren't born with anything, so sucks to suck, right? But he also goes on to say, but you one day will get Suguna's curse technique, right? So if Yuji had had some sort of secret or even dormant technique, Gojo would have been able to see it. Okay, so now since we've got all of that groundwork out of the way, I want to react to this comment I got from Animorphs, where he shares his theory on why Yuji actually does have a memory modification ability tied to his blood manipulation technique. And Animorph sent in a very thorough, well thought out comment that was really long. It's too long for me to show all of it on screen here, but for anybody that wants to read it, you can find it on YouTube, but Animorphs did provide a summary at the end, so you're still going to get the full gist of it, and I'm going to react to each of these points from the summary. So the first one is, Choso has set the precedent that blood manipulation interpretations can be broadened to concepts like blood brother connections. Basically saying the ability for Choso to sense when his brothers are dying could be like a facet of the blood manipulation technique, which then sets the precedent for Yuji potentially having a memory modification facet to his own blood manipulation technique. And I'll say, fair enough. I'll grant that for this. I do think that Choso's ability to sense his brothers might not be connected to blood manipulation and could just be some other facet of their connection being curse womb death painting brothers, which would also apply to Yuji since he similarly was experimented upon by Kinjaku. Now, Yuji isn't half cursed like the rest of them, but still, I think we could come up with other conceivable explanations for why Choso has that ability that aren't explicitly connected to blood manipulation. For example, we don't see Noritoshi Kamo having any of this type of stuff going on, right? But again, I'll just grant this. Let's say that, yeah, Choso's ability is connected to blood manipulation, so Yuji could have something similar. Then his next point is we have two examples where Yuji's blood mixes with his opponent's, and that triggers memories of hallucinations in both Todo and Choso. And again, I'll say fair enough for now, but we do have an explanation for why that happened with Choso that doesn't require Yuji's interference. And we'll talk more about Todo in a minute. The next Animorph says Yuji's domain expansion is clearly too big and it changes Sukuna's physical appearance, implying that the technique imbued into his domain is a memory related one and not shrine. And here, I don't think that needs to be the case at all, because Yuji's domain expansion being so big and being, this trip down memory lane where they're walking through Japan doesn't mean it has to be memory related, because domain sizes are not equivalent to their actual size within space, with the exception being open domains like Sukuna's, right? I'm trying to think of a good example. Like they're literally like pocket dimensions, if you want to think of it like that. Like it's an extra dimensional space contained within a barrier. So like the actual space within a domain does not have to be equal to the actual space that like the barrier is taking up within reality. And we see this with some people's domains, right? Like Dagon's domain being the full beach. Like that's obviously not just contained in that little circle when he casts it. Or Hikari's being the train station, right? Or what's another good example? Maybe Higuruma's courtroom, right? But Yuji's is the best example of this because clearly, he's walking around a whole city. So that I think can just be a property of domains. In extra dimensional spaces, they can be much bigger on the inside than what appears to be on the out, right? Now, Sukuna's appearance changing, I don't really have a good explanation for that, but I would just chalk it up to the way Yuji's domain works. However, I do think we know that the technique imbued into it is Shrine because we see the slashes hitting Sukuna when Yuji does this. And Sukuna even says, these are puny, like they're doing nothing to me. Okay, I wanted to find this panel really quick of Sukuna in Yuji's domain expansion. And this is right after he had been cut up and now he's healing. And he says, you think you can flay me with this superficial domain. So we do know that Shrine is the technique imbued into this. And then Animorph says, Gojo Six Eyes can't see everything. And we know that they miss certain passive abilities like the poison immunity Yuji got from eating Sukuna's fingers. And, sure, the Six Eyes can't see everything, but we know they can see curse techniques and things related to that, right? So if Yuji had some sort of memory modification attached to blood manipulation, he would have at least needed to have blood manipulation, which Gojo would have been able to see. But even if we want to, not take that for whatever reason, we have another data point, and that is Yuji's fight with Higuruma, where he gets confiscated. And had Yuji had a curse technique, that is what would have been confiscated. But instead, Yuji lost his cursed energy because he has no technique. Then Animorph's next point is that there is a precedent of sorcerers using their techniques instinctively without even realizing they have them, like Haruta's Miracles and Takaba's Comedian. And 100%, I just don't think that's the case for Yuji, but that type of thing is possible. And then finally, Animorph says Yuji's ability to connect with even his enemies thematically fits with his character arc and his domain hand sign that has a love for all people, even his enemies. And I'm right there with you. Like, I definitely think this is all within character for Yuji to have this empathetic connection with people. And I think all of that was very intentional. But I still don't think that points to him having this memory technique. Now, at the end of the day, you might say, well, you know what? Agree to disagree. I interpret things differently, and I think Yuji could have a memory modification technique. And first of all, I think that's fantastic, right? I literally live for this type of theory crafting and connecting the dots. So I truly do love this well thought out comment from Animorphs. But the reason I'm so confident in that it's not the case is that in addition to all of this, we've even had Gege Akutami specifically comment on this. 3 or 4 years ago, he did an interview with Kobayashi, and yes, that's Gege in a Mechamaru cosplay because he likes to remain anonymous. And this subject specifically came up in reference to Todo and Choso and the false memories. And Gege says, yeah, there's nothing weird going on here. There is no memory technique or anything like that. Todo and Choso are experiencing those memories for different reasons. And that interview came out before the Choso reveal. So we know why Choso had those memories. And Todo is just Todo. And then while I still got y'all here, I wanted to respond to another comment I got. So shout out to Snake, who actually sent this in response to a video we put out last week talking about could Mahito have the potential to resurrect people from the dead. So check out that video if you're interested in that concept. But Snake says he thinks it could be possible in a slightly different way than what we talked about there, where he says that if Mahito understood the shape of someone's soul enough to the extent where he could perfectly recreate it, then even if he couldn't resurrect them in their own body, he could go transform someone else into that person. So, for example, like he could go transform Yuji into Megami if he understood Megami's soul enough, right, to recreate that with idle transfiguration. And that is a fascinating idea. We do know that Mahito can change his outward appearance to look like anything he wants. So at the very least, he could make, a skin of whoever he wanted, but would that actually be that person, assuming he could perfectly recreate their soul? And here we get into some more like ship of thesis philosophical debates, right? So, how much does the mind, body, and soul interact to create the thing that is you? So this is really fascinating to think about. And I do think he could do it, but just how deeply he could do it is another question. Could he actually faithfully recreate that true person? I don't know. That's going to do it for this one, y'all. Like, comment, subscribe, follow if you're feeling so inclined. And as always, thank you for watching.